I am King Tut Kiss FM, and welcome to the sneak peek of Treasures of Ancient Egypt, Sunken Cities, now at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. We're going to dive into one of the most astonishing underwater discoveries of all time. And right now, I want to bring to the show Courtney Morano, the interpretation manager. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice to be here.
Hey, and also I want to bring to the show Peter Schertz, the Jack and Mary Ann Frable curator of ancient art. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm okay, thank you, and thank you for hosting this.
Now, these are trying times with y'all people, so you got to tell me, what is it like for the museum to open during a pandemic?
Well, a little bit nerve-wracking, but our priority is the safety of our staff and our visitors, because nobody wants to go to a museum until they feel safe.
Yeah.
So we've already, in keeping with Governor Northam's policies, we have a mandatory mask policy in effect. You can't come in without your mask. And we also have, we also are enforcing or asking people to respect social distancing.
Yeah.
If you come in and you want to eat at the museum, you're welcome to. We've altered how we do our food services to make sure that people can socially distance. We've simplified menus. We've reduced the number of tables and things like that. So, again, we just want people to feel safe when they're coming in. And I think Courtney can talk a little bit more about that and kind of the mechanics of getting down to us.
Yeah, so we're located, VMFA is located at Grove and Arthur Ashe Boulevard, and we are open 7 days a week. So there's lots of opportunity for you to visit. But like Peter said, we're doing everything that we can to make sure that people feel safe when they come into the museum. So there's a lot more cleaning protocols, hand sanitizing stations, stuff like that. And we also really want to encourage people for this exhibition to get their tickets ahead of time, because we are trying to really limit the amount of people that are in that space at one time, just to help with that social distancing. So yeah, and get your tickets online at bmfa.museum. Come see us.
There you go. All right, Peter, the spotlight is on. What are we talking about today?
So we are talking about a really fantastic exhibition. It has almost 300 objects in it.
Ooh.
Almost all of them were taken out from under the waters of the Mediterranean coast off of Egypt. So these things were, these things have been excavated over the past 20 or 30 years. And they're from a really fascinating period when Egypt and its very ancient civilization was mixing with Greek civilization. Later it mixes with Roman civilization. And what you get is this amazing hybrid culture with fascinating objects. We get to, through this exhibition, study changes in ancient Egyptian religion, change in rulers, governing systems. It's really a lot of fun.
Wow. Let's delve into it. What are the people going to see the minute they walk in and they start this exhibit?
So right at the entrance of the atrium, we have the statue of Hapi.
Wow.
Hapi is an ancient fertility god. And honestly, if the ancient Egyptians wanted to do it, we English speakers a favor, to name a fertility god Hapi was a tremendous favor from them.
Wow.
Because, here he is greeting our visitors. What you see him holding in his hands is an offering tray. And he may have once stood outside of a temple making offerings to the gods of the temple, but in Richmond, he's standing all of 18 feet tall, weighing nearly 6 tons, and kind of offering the treasures and the delights of this exhibition to our public.
How in the world did you get that into the museum?
Well, you can see he's been broken because you can see some of the cracks in him. So he wasn't 18 feet tall when we brought him into the building. But he wasn't 2 huge crates together with a couple of tons of steel that used to support him from the back and to distribute his weight across our floor. And it was fascinating because they did it without any machinery. It was just by hand and using hand carts.
Wow.
Other basic technologies like winches. And to get them into the actual building, we laid down, kind of a pathway of half-inch or three-quarter-inch plywood, I'm not sure which. And as they moved these crates, each of which weighed several tons across the plywood, you could hear the plywood cracking. And I've never heard plywood crack under the weight of anything before.
Wow, that is amazing. And I got to say that we hear so much about museums and we hear about educators. Now, normally you hear educator, we're talking about schools. So, Courtney, break it down. What exactly does an educator do at the museum?
Well, it depends on the day. Absolutely. A little bit of everything, I would say. But we definitely work with school groups. So that's something that we do, working with school groups. But we have over 30 education staff. So we handle a lot of different things. We have a little motto that we serve infant to infinity, because we actually have classes for as young as 3 months old to as old as you can be. We do classes, lectures, art classes, guided tours. You name it, we do it. Teacher programs, all sorts of things. But my role as interpretation manager is really to think about those audiences, the different audiences that we serve, and how to take what we're communicating, in particular in the galleries, and how to make that relatable. So get to work on projects with Peter, which is one of the best parts of the job, of course. Work on exhibitions, producing audio guides, the brochures that go along with it, really thinking about how to make the information really relevant to the audience.
Right.
Yeah. So a great way a great way to do that, great transition, is something like a map, because every time we have an exhibition, we really want to make sure that people understand, not only what we're talking about, but where we're talking about. So really grounding people in the place that we are going to explore in whatever it is, in this case, ancient Egypt. So love to start with a map. So what we're looking at here is a map where the two cities that are explored in the exhibition, Thonis, Heraklion, and Canopus, are in that sort of northwest coast of Africa. So grounding people in understanding that Egypt is, of course, in Africa. It's one of the oldest and most powerful ancient African civilizations. I mean, if you think about, over 5,000 years ago, this civilization emerged. So just think about the antiquity of that. But thinking about its location, so it's a very strategic location. The Nile was really important. It gave Egypt life. And then the Mediterranean Sea to the north. But it also allowed Egypt to be very protected. You've got deserts to the east and deserts to the west. You've got very treacherous waters in the sort of deep south of the Nile, and you have the Mediterranean Sea again to the north. So it allowed Egypt to really develop sort of unconquered as much as many civilizations were. So that's a great thing to think about with its location. And you can also see here that orange part on the map, these two cities, they're now underwater. So as Peter mentioned, this is an underwater archaeological show for the most part. So these two cities were destroyed over 1,200 years ago. They kind of finally sank under the sea due to cataclysmic climate events, flooding. They're near the Nile and that Nile Delta region. So flooding was just sort of a natural part of daily life as well.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. And it brings back memories. I was in the military and I was stationed over in Turkey. And I talked to a lot of people there and from Adana and people from Egypt. And they talked about how religious the mountains and the land and the oceans, how so many things were so biblical and how it was so guarded and protected. So I guess my question now is, how did you get it from the bottom of the ocean to the surface?
Well, it's a specialized area of archaeology called underwater archaeology. And of course, people have been taking things out of shipwrecks since the first shipwreck, probably. You see a ship sink and you think there's got to be something worthwhile in that ship, and you go and you try to get it. But as archaeologists, they do it really carefully and with a lot of high technology devices, computer programs that help them map the seafloor, that let them kind of take an image of what the seafloor is like, but not just the top of the seafloor, but what's underneath it. So you can use the sort of kind of radar system that will say, okay, here's a big line of stones, like 5 feet under the sand. And, it's harder, so it bounces stuff off of it more effectively than the sand. And you say, oh, that line of stone must mean something. Mm. And that tells the archaeologists, okay, go and explore in this area. And they can dive down to it. They can take equipment that will suck away the sand and expose buildings, artifacts. And depending on the size of the artifact, like that sphinx that we were just looking at, you can use winches to bring it up to the surface. Whenever I see that sphinx, I think we should put a mask on him. Because, this is the age of COVID, man.
Hey, social
Look at the diver.
The
diver has a mask on. Why doesn't the sphinx? Mm. They're not even social distancing in this picture.
Now, look, researchers were set out to look for 3 different cities, but actually something happened, right?
Well, these cities had sunk about 1,200 years ago, probably from a tsunami, which happens after there's an earthquake. A big wave of water can come in.
Right.
And the soil, it's kind of like the Mississippi Delta. If you think about New Orleans and how easy that land is to kind of sink, how soft it is, when there's a flood, the water, the earth just sort of washes away. That's what happened with these cities. So they sank about 1,200 years ago, but we knew about them from literary references. So the excavator from Cambodia was able to say, okay, we know these cities were in Abu-Gereb because ancient people wrote about them. Let's go and find them. So he began looking for these 3 different cities, and only later, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, did he realize, oh, this is actually 2 cities. Thonis Heraklion is one place, and Canopus is another place.
Wow. That's amazing. I've been hearing some things about the Black Queen. Courtney, what is the situation with that?
Yeah, so it's one of the first amazing objects that you'll come into contact with when you enter the exhibition. So I think we have an image of her that we'll show. Yeah, wow. So you don't get the scale here. She's just over 9 feet tall. So it's really,
you can see that from here. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, really imposing. And she's sort of called the Black Queen because of the stone that she is made of, obviously. But this is what really sets up the exhibition in terms of time. So I mentioned place, so we like to ground people in understanding sort of where we are in the world. But we also like to make sure people understand sort of what's the time frame of the exhibition. What is the time frame of everything that they're going to go through the exhibition and see? So the objects in this show date to what we would call late period Egypt, so 7th century BC, so 2,700 years ago, 2,600 years ago, through the 4th century AD. So it covers kind of a chunk of time, and this was a time of tremendous change. So we're in ancient Egypt, but at this time you had ancient Egypt being ruled by of course, the Egyptians, but also Persians and Greeks, and then the Romans. So you've got all of this change, but it's also a time of great continuity. I mean, if you think about ancient Egypt, a lot of people think about it sort of a stagnant civilization, but that's not exactly the case. There's periods of great change and also some definite elements of continuity.
Yeah, I'm looking at her, and she looks elegant in the dress that she's wearing. I noticed the cobra too. So explain that to me. What exactly are you seeing in the statue?
Yeah, so I think if you were to see her, of course, her size is going to indicate one thing to you, right? And she's set up on a pedestal, so the size obviously communicates, that this is a powerful woman. But in ancient Egypt, it would have meant the same thing. Beyond just her size, each sort of element of the way that she looks communicated something. There's kind of this visual language that was communicated through art. So if we look at sort of what she has on her head, she's wearing a crown. It's a little hard to tell, but she's got a crown with a rearing cobra right in the center there. And that's called a uraeus. So it's a cobra. It's just a symbol of the kings and queens of ancient Egypt, as well as the gods and goddesses. So only kings and queens in ancient Egypt could wear that symbol. So immediately somebody in ancient Egypt would know, okay, I'm in at least the presence of a king or a queen or representation of a god or goddess. We don't know exactly who this represents. There's not an inscription on this sculpture that would tell us who she is, but we do know that she was a member of what we call the Ptolemaic dynasty. And the Ptolemies were sort of in control of Egypt from the very late 4th century BC to about 30 BC, and they're Greek, so they're not native Egyptians. And I think Peter's going to kind of tell us a little bit more about why the Greeks were here and what they had to do with Egypt.
Well, why the Greeks were there is because they were able to be. They conquered Egypt, which had been part of the Persian Empire. That's under Alexander the Great. And Alexander kind of comes into Egypt, tells the Egyptians, oh, look, here I am. I've just liberated you from the Persians. Aren't I wonderful?
Wow.
But of course, he's a military conqueror. It's like, yeah, I got rid of the Persians. I'm in charge now. Yeah. Alexander the Great dies really young, and he has a cavalry commander named Ptolemy. And his empire, Alexander has this huge empire, and his commanders decide to divide it up and rule it on behalf of his heir. And Ptolemy says, oh, I'll go to Egypt, which is really, really wealthy. And because of that geography that Courtney was telling us about, difficult to attack. So Ptolemy's like, yeah, I'm going to settle down in Egypt. And he pretends to rule on behalf of the heir for a while. Mm-hmm. And then he says, yeah, I'm just going to set myself up as a king. And he founds what's called the Ptolemaic dynasty. And they rule Egypt for 300 years nearly.
Wow.
Wow. Probably the most famous Ptolemy is Cleopatra, the one that Shakespeare writes about. They make movies about her. Mm-hmm. She has, consorts, and Julius Caesar and Mark Antony.
Yeah.
But eventually she gets defeated by a guy called Octavian, who becomes the Roman Emperor Augustus. And for the next 700 years, Egypt is part of the Roman Empire. First as a pagan empire, and then as part of the Christian Empire of Rome.
Wow. That's a lot to take in, and it's amazing.
That's a lot of history that I just...
But it's great. It's great history to learn about that, because we always hear about Cleopatra and so many things like that. So to hear it broken down after seeing the statue, it's a lot of combinations going in with this, right, Courtney?
Yeah, there's a lot of elements that are sort of what you consider purely Egyptian or traditionally Egyptian, but then also some things that are more purely Greek. So her hairstyle. So if we were to look closely at her hairstyle, it's in what we call corkscrew curls. So these beautiful ringlets. That's a very typical Greek hairstyle at the time. And then also her dress. She has this sort of what you can imagine as a sheer dress, but it's knotted right between her chest, and that's called an Isis knot. Isis was in one of the most popular, famous old Egyptian goddesses. But this style of dress didn't become popular until the Greeks were in control of Egypt. So she's definitely got all of these Greek and Egyptian elements going on. You can't necessarily see her hands, or sort of some breaks in her hands, but she does hold 2 other symbols that are more Egyptian. She holds a rattle or a sistrum, which is sacred to the goddess Isis. She also holds an ankh. I think a lot of people are familiar with the ankh, that cross with a sort of circle at the top, which is a symbol of eternal life, which is a reference to Isis's husband. So, while this is a queen, she's also got elements that are associating her with a goddess. So she wants to kind of see herself in the role of a goddess. So that's another interesting thought to think about with these images as well. So this section, as I mentioned, is really focused on time. So thinking about this time, a lot of it is during this time of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Mm-hmm. But sort of in the next section, and Peter's going to take us through, we start to think more about, again, where we are. So we know we're in Egypt, but taking a closer look at the 2 cities of Thonis Heracleion and Canopus.
Still,
Yeah, so if we could see the image of the stele,
Mm.
beautiful image. You can't see it here, but it's 6 feet tall, so again, really enormous.
Wow.
Even from looking at this picture of it, you can see how perfectly preserved it is. And the reason it's perfectly preserved is somebody wanted to keep it. So when the excavators found this under the water, it had been coated with a layer of clay on the surface and placed lying face down someplace. And that's probably, again, that's evidence that somebody wanted to keep it safe. And we think it was kept safe by priests. This whole 6 foot tall inscription with its pictures is a decree about taxes of all things. You know, we think of taxes as being really boring and not at all beautiful, but the Egyptians made this, and it's a beautiful object that essentially says there's going to be a tax on everything going through this place called Thonis, a city that Dodio, the excavator, had been looking for. And we're going to take 10% of those taxes and give them to a temple to a goddess called Neith in a city called Sais. So this is actually a really important artifact because it was the first sign that the excavators had identified Thonis. And what's really also important about it is the inscription in hieroglyphs mentions the name Amun-Gereb. And from ancient literary sources, we knew that Amun-Gereb was a major god in a city in Egypt, and that the temple of Amun-Gereb in Greece was referred to as the temple of Heracles. It's an aspect of polytheism. That the Greeks, you know, if you were a polytheist, a believer in many gods, you would associate familiar names of gods with new gods. So Greek merchants or travelers who came to Thonis said, oh, Amun is like our Heracles. We're going to call the temple of Amun the temple of Heracles, which in Greek is Heraklion. So with this object, the excavators could realize, oh, Thonis and Heraklion are one city.
Wow.
And on the basis of that, they've continued their excavations and research, and have even been able to develop a digital restoration of what the city would have looked like, the sort of seascape that's reproduced in the exhibition.
Wow, that is amazing. And in looking at that picture, you see most hieroglyphics because from what I know, a lot of ancient Egyptians couldn't read, right, Courtney?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something that we talk about a lot is that the average person in ancient Egypt or a lot of ancient societies couldn't necessarily read and write. But again, thinking about like what we talked about with the Black Queen, people could read this visual language. So they would know immediately that this image was important, again, because of its scale, where it may have been placed. And then also they would have known sort of what the images represent. So they would have known that the images were of a pharaoh. We see the pharaoh making offerings to a goddess who is seated on this throne. And they would have understood the importance sort of immediately. So even if they couldn't read and write, they would know the significance.
Wow.
So yeah, absolutely.
That is amazing. Now, by looking at things like this, can we tell what the cities would have looked like?
Yeah, so we do have a reconstruction, an artist reconstruction in the exhibition. So I think we have an image of what that looks like. So you can see in the background there, this is just an artist rendering of what the city, we believe, would have looked like. So based on the excavations and based on, all of the information that Frank Godio and his team have uncovered, this is an artist rendering of what the city would have looked like. So you can see the largest building sort of towards the right in the background is that temple of a god called Amun-Gereb, which I think Peter will talk about later. Mm-hmm. But you can see the city it's on the water, right? You can see how much water there is here. And kind of understand why the city may have sunk. And the image sort of here in the foreground that sort of looks like a small building is something which is something that we call a naos of this god Amun-Gereb, which is discovered near that temple that we see in the background.
So what exactly is a naos?
It's actually the dwelling place of a god. And remember again, these are polytheists. They believe in many gods. And in any cult image, the god can reside, sometimes simultaneously in theory. So the god actually lives in that place via his cult image, via the statue of him. And every day, the priests in the temple would take the god out, bathe him, dress him, give him offerings of food and drink, and the god would be outside of his home during the day. And in the evening, the priest would put the image back in the naos and close the doors. And one of my favorite details about this naos is if you look at it closely, you can see these little kind of dowel holes, by the entranceway, by the opening in the front.
Mm.
And that's where the hinges of the doors went. So, looking at this object, you can actually learn about how it was being used.
Wow. So only pretty much the priests and the pharaohs really saw the gods.
Pretty much. Only during great festivals, which we'll talk about, images of the gods would be carried in the streets. Mm-hmm. And you might have your own image of the god at home, or as an amulet around your neck.
Right.
But these big, important cult images, that was kind of secret and private. Not everybody could go into the temples.
So for those who are watching right now and they don't know, who exactly is God Amun-Gereb and why was he so important?
Amun is a pretty early god in ancient Egypt. He was important in Egypt, but in the land south of Egypt, beyond the first cataract, Nubia, which is modern Sudan, he was really important. He was their most important god. So he was worshipped by both of these ancient civilizations. And just before this city was built, just at the beginning of the late period of Egyptian history, the Nubians had conquered all of Egypt and united it. And they really raised the profile of the cult of Amun-Gereb. And even after the Nubian dynasty was expelled back to the south, back beyond the first cataract, the Egyptians continued to honor him. And during the Ptolemaic period, this temple to Amun-Gereb is where every new pharaoh, each of these new Greek pharaohs, would go to this temple and they would kind of get legitimacy from the gods. The god would, Amun would say, okay, you're the new pharaoh, go ahead and rule, take good, be nice to me, and I'll be nice to you and to the peoples of Egypt.
Wow, that's amazing. And I think they used to give away a lot of things too, right, Courtney? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So thinking about, thanking a god for something or asking a god for something, temples, had a function of being storehouses for offerings. So people would make offerings of things like jewelry. So I think we have a great image of an earring. So this is an earring.
That is different.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just a mythical creature. It's a Greek earring. So one of the things that's interesting to talk about with the jewelry is not only this idea that it was offerings, but this city was really a center for trade. So we have earrings like this that come from, or jewelry that come from all different areas across the Mediterranean. So Greece, the Near East, this was kind of the center. And people are making these offerings. They are giving things that they actually wore. So I love the idea of thinking about somebody, who wore this earring, possibly taking off this earring and making an offering to Amun-Gereb, for something. Maybe they're asking for something. Are they asking for, a favor, or are they thankful for something? Maybe something good happened to them and they're really thankful. So again, just this really personal devotion, this idea of this personal connection to gods and goddesses that people had and the way that they would make things. And it's just really interesting to think about, what did the person who gave this earring, what were they thankful for? What were they asking for?
And it had to be hard for women to give up their jewelry. So, what is so important? What was so trying about people giving up their personal, possessions like rings and earrings to the gods?
Well, as Courtney was saying, it's a manifestation of piety. And if you wanted a favor from a god, you might say, okay, dear Amun-Gereb, I need some help with a trade deal, because this is a port after all. And if you help me, I will give you something. And the trade deal works out, and you say, okay, you lived up to your end of the bargain, I'm living up to mine.
Wow.
Or maybe, something happened, like you were in an accident, and you recovered, and you might dedicate, and there is a dedication to another god at the end of the exhibition, where somebody wrote an inscription saying, I'm dedicating this temple to the Blessed One. We don't know which god he meant exactly, probably Isis or a god named Serapis, but I'm dedicating this because I survived my chariot accident. So imagine you were in a car accident and you said, okay, I better go make a gift to my local church or whatever. Essentially, that's what they're doing. And the fact that this jewelry comes from all over the Mediterranean also tells us something important about ancient belief systems. Again, they believe in many gods, so they'll have no problem honoring a god in a city that's foreign to them. So that earring is made by a Greek, that earring was made by a Greek in a Greek land, and may have been dedicated to an Egyptian god by someone who was from Greece. And that was all right in antiquity. You have this amazing religious system where there are many gods, and you can honor the gods of your hometown, of your neighbor's town, of your wife's town, or if you're traveling, you were in Turkey, there would be local gods in Turkey in antiquity, and you would honor those local gods. It's a way of showing respect to the gods and the people around them.
And I think that kind of speaks to the next section of the exhibition, really talks about sort of big picture Egyptian religion. So thinking about kind of the nature of polytheism, so this nature and belief in many gods and goddesses. And I think our next image is of two of the most important gods and goddesses. So we mentioned Isis. So the queen that we saw at the very beginning was sort of dressed as Isis or associated with Isis. And we have Isis here on the left. And then her husband, the god Osiris, which I'm sure may be familiar to many. So Osiris is the first mummy. You see him sort of tightly wrapped up here, which is an indication that he was the first mummy. He was also the first king, so he's also associated with kings. He holds in his arms, he holds some symbols, again, thinking about that visual language of things people would recognize. He holds a crook and a flail, so things that are associated with agriculture. And Isis, in a sense, became sort of more popular throughout the rest of the Mediterranean and other religions. But Osiris sort of, is definitely a standout in terms of his association with, fertility, probably initially, but then mummification, and his association with the underworld.
Mm. So I guess the question is, what do Egyptians say about these gods?
Well, this is a wonderful, wonderful soap opera, because Isis and Osiris they are married, but they're also siblings.
I left that out, Peter.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
That crook and flail are symbols of royalty in ancient Egypt. But they begin as agricultural symbols. So again, Osiris is associated with agriculture. But these two siblings, happy-go-lucky rulers of early Egypt, at least in Egyptian mythology, they have a brother named Seth, who isn't a really nice guy. And a sister named Nephthys, who's, is actually pretty nice, helps Isis out. But Seth is a jealous brother. So he tries to get rid of Osiris. First, he locks Osiris into a box and hides the box. But Isis searches all over and finds the box and, lets her brother husband out of the box, as it were. Seth is enraged by this. He finds Osiris again and he rips him into 14 pieces, scatters them all over the world. Isis, again, good wife, good sister, goes and finds all of the pieces and lays them out on a table. and wraps them in linen and creates the first mummy. And then, using her magic, she turns herself into a bird of prey called a kite. And she brings Osiris back to life. And he's back to life in this realm, where you and I live, just long enough for Isis to become pregnant. But then he kind of recedes and becomes the ruler of the underworld, where he enjoys eternal life. So the story is about the life, death, and rebirth of Osiris. And that's a paradigm for everything in Egypt. That's what happens with the year. You know, in December we have the longest nights, the shortest days, and from late December on, the days get longer. The days are associated with the sun in Egypt, that's life, until summer when they start growing short again. But it's this eternal cycle of the year. The day is the same thing. When the sun is out, that's when life is happening. When the sun sets, and remember there's no electricity in antiquity, that's darkness, it's a scary time of chaos, and it's kind of like death. And then the sun returns to life, and so do we. And that's exactly what Osiris does. And the ritual that's sort of central to the cities of Thonis, Heraklion, and Canopus is sort of a reenactment of that whole cyclical story of the life, death, and rebirth of Osiris that you can sort of see with the beginning with this next image that we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Ah, see, and now it brings me to when I see the movies, The Mummy, and you see different things like that. I was wondering if those movies were close to being correct to what we're seeing right now. So is that a mummy we're actually looking at right now?
Well, hopefully it won't come to life.
No.
We want it to come to life. We want the seeds in it to sprout.
Not while we're here.
No. Okay.
But yeah, it is a kind of mummy. It's something we call a corn or a grain mummy, also known as an Osiris vegeton. So, which means Osiris who animates or invigorates. It's essentially a fertility figure, and these figures were created in secrecy inside the temples by the priests. So again, this idea of things that, sort of happened in secret that only the priests could see. And they did this to ensure the fertility of the land. So they would make each of these by taking barley seeds and soil wrapped in linen, and they would form it in the shape of Osiris as the first mummy. And so one of these was created every year. Again, kind of within secret by the priests. And it really honored the flooding season. They were created during a certain month that we call the month of Koyak. And again, this idea was that it would guarantee fertility, a good harvest for the coming of the year. So Peter talked a little bit about cycles, the cycle of the day, the cycle of the year, and that cycle of the Nile. So the Nile would flood. The banks would overflow, bringing this really rich soil, and then farmers would plant their crops in this wonderful fertile soil, and then the waters would, once the water, everything sort of died back, you would have this period of death, and that's really mirrored in that myth of Osiris, sort of his birth, death, and rebirth. And there was something called the Mysteries of Osiris. Something, was a festival that reenacted this every year. And so a lot of this was a secret. So thinking about how that affects sort of what we know and then what we don't know. So Peter, why don't you tell us sort of a little bit more about the mysteries, how mysterious they were?
Well, there isn't that much we can say because they were mysteries. So by definition, we don't know about them. That was secret knowledge. And it was the secret knowledge of the priesthoods who created these images. But we do know something about it from ancient texts written on temple walls, for instance, because it's not graffiti, but they wrote all over their temples in antiquity, at least in Egypt. So we know something about these rituals, that they involve making that figure of Osiris vegetons, the grain mummy. You would make it in using a golden mold, and you would mix the silt of the Nile with barley seeds. and put that mixture into the mold and let it set. And when it's set, you would wrap it up together, and you would put the two halves together of the figure and wrap it in linen to create this mummy. And then you would put the figure of the mummy into this big stone basin, and we have an example of that in the exhibition, and you would water it with the sacred, health-giving waters of the Nile. And eventually what happens with barley seeds and soil, they sprout. So that's how it's a kind of magical ritual to ensure the fertility of the land. And as Courtney was saying, this happens in the month of Korek. The creation of this figure happens in secrecy, but at the end of the festival, this type of figure, the Osiris vegetans, would be carried by a boat and a big public festival that we explore in the next section of the exhibition.
Is that a boat? What is that? Is that a picture of a boat? It looks like it's underwater though.
It is. It's one of 75 shipwrecks that they identified in the excavations. What's unique about it is that it was deliberately sunk, and you can sort of see an area where the wood has disappeared. They took out the plank to sink it deliberately. And it's also the only boat out of all of those 75 made out of a type of wood called sycamore. Sycamore is a tree native to Egypt, one of the few trees that grow in such a dry climate. And because it did grow in Egypt, it was a symbol of life and very closely associated with Osiris. And what the excavators think happened is this boat was used in a public ritual carrying the Osiris vegetans figure over the waterways of Thonis, Heraklion, and Canopus. And when it could no longer be used, because it had been used by a god, by the Osiris vegetans, it had to be ritually destroyed. So they took away the planks and they sank it. And this entire corridor that you can see is filled with objects from the waterways, and many of them show evidence that they were deliberately destroyed. So you'll get these lead boats, images of boats, votive offerings that have been twisted up to make sure that because they were given to the gods, no human could use them. And I think Courtney, can talk about just what is it like to have this ancient festival, and what do these objects tell us about it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about the actual people. So again, thinking about the jewelry and the people who would have owned the jewelry and actually worn it. So there are, as Peter mentioned, there's some different objects within this same place where the boat, you see the image of the boat. There's bells and rattles, and if you could just think about the sights that people would have been seeing, they would have been seeing this sort of procession of the boats. There would have been lanterns lit to night the light as these boats came down this canal. People would have been singing and chanting. So I like to think about all the noises and smells. There would have been incense burning. And people would have been pouring offerings, as Peter mentioned, into the water. There were special places where they could dedicate, offering trays, or again, these boat models. And I just really like to picture in my head all of these people who felt so proud to be there, and just, the sort of religious fervor that they might have been experiencing as all of this was happening. And to have evidence of that is really amazing. And to think about it happening every year, and thinking about the cycle again, bringing it back to cycles.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. Truly amazing.
Yeah. And so I think, from here, so we're still thinking about the Festival of Osiris, but, a lot of these traditions continued. So if we think about how, as much as there was sort of continuity in Egyptian religion, there were some changes that happened. So the last section of the exhibition really focuses on how some of these traditions adapted and changed in the Greek period and leading into the Roman time. So
always change.
Always change. Change is good a lot of times. Yeah. So we have this amazing wooden image of a god called Serapis. So it's a great way to think about, again, just change and continuity, and which is something religion sort of embodies. So, sometimes things are very, very static, very traditional, but a lot of times things, they keep up with the times. Traditions change over the course of the years. And the sculpture really embodies that idea, in particular, of change. So I think Peter's going to sort of kind of take it from here and talk a little bit more about this figure.
Well, it's a god named Serapis, and what I love about Serapis is he's literally an invented god. So Ptolemy the first Greek to rule over Egypt, he's a really brilliant politician. His big challenge is, okay, I'm here with a few thousand Macedonian Greeks. Egypt is a vast, wealthy, proud country. How do I convince these Egyptians to let me rule over them? And he does things like adopt the Egyptian traditions of kingship. That's very different from the types of kings they had in Greece. But he also does things like invent Serapis. He says that, according to an ancient source, he had a dream, and in his dream, a cult image told him, come and bring me from my city in Sinope and the Black Sea, bring me to Egypt. So Ptolemy I, he wakes up, he says, go get this cult image from Sinope. And they do. And they bring it back to his city of Alexandria. And the religious authorities there say, oh, that's a kind of version of the Greek god of the underworld, Hades. Wow. And they decide to name this cult Serapis, which is a combination of Osiris. Remember Osiris because he's a god of mummification, of mummies, as a ruler of the underworld, just like Hades. And Apis, one of the oldest and most traditional of Egyptian cults. And if you look at this statue, you can see aspects of Serapis that are very much inspired by Greece, including that big heavy beard. That's the same type of beard that the Greek god, the king of the gods, Zeus has, but also Poseidon and Hades. And you can't see it in this image, but in other images in the exhibition, on top of Serapis's head is this grain basket. And that's a basket specific to Egypt, and it's a symbol of the fertility of the land of Egypt. So, essentially Ptolemy has said, okay, I'm going to invent a new god that the Greeks can worship and the Egyptians can worship. And it works. Not only do they worship it, especially the Greeks, but under the Roman Empire, the cult of Serapis is celebrated from Roman Britain all the way to Roman Syria and Egypt and as far north as Armenia, all over the Roman Empire. You get people worshipping Serapis. But he's invented. And this particular one is also just worth looking at because it's wood. Very little wood survives from antiquity. But you can see there are little pink bits of color and blue color. This statue was painted in antiquity. And to be able to look at that paint and imagine what this would have looked like, fully painted, it's just an amazing object to contemplate.
Wow. This is amazing watching this. It's so amazing. I just feel like, woof. Things you just don't know until you actually come out and see this exhibition and get so enriched with such history of Egypt. It's amazing. But he had to, put this whole thing into motion for a reason, though, right?
Well, yeah, survival. There are maybe 10,000 Macedonians. And he has to convince the Egyptians to buy into his rule. So he's very good to the priesthood in Egypt because that's one of the traditional power centers. He works with the local Egyptian aristocracy to make sure that they're happy. And he does so many things to reassure the people of Egypt at all levels of society, I may be Greek, but I'm a legitimate ruler for you. That's why he has to go to the temple of Amun-Gereb to get the legitimacy of the Egyptian gods. Because if the Egyptian gods are going to be happy, the Egyptian people will be happy with him ruling. And again, all throughout his policies, you see this pattern of, how do I manage to rule this people? So.
Wow.
So it's a long history to take you through.
I'm sitting there, I'm just looking, and I'm sitting there thinking about it too. And as we go back to stele and talking about, all the images and things like that, this is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. And to be able to come in to the museum and see this exhibition, it kind of blows you away.
Yeah, and it's really the last chance. So, I mean, from once it leaves VMFA, right now we're closing in mid-January, everything goes back to Egypt. So we want you to come. This might be your last chance to see these objects, definitely in the United States, unless you head to Egypt. So we're just really thrilled to have this here for as long as we do, and give people a chance to see these works of art. And there's an audio guide. I mean, there's so many ways to supplement your visit when you come. There's a great intro film that if you purchase tickets ahead of time, you can see. There's an audio guide, a couple of brochures, a family guide. So, just a lot of ways for you to experience the show. Programming, we have a host of amazing virtual programs now, so that you can learn more about this great subject. So
I just want to take the time to thank you, Courtney and Peter, for taking us through this journey. But I know when people actually see it in person themselves, it's going to be like, wow, they're going to be blown away. Anyone watching this right now, you can get more information about VMFA and tickets to see this amazing exhibition at Treasures of Ancient Egypt, Sunken Cities, online at vmfa.museum. That's vmfa.museum. Use a special promo code, King Tut, right now. You can use that. That's KINGTUTT. So fitting for an Egyptian. You add the second T, KINGTUTT, to get discount tickets. This offer expires September 30th, though. So that means you need to go ahead and act soon and do it. Do it in a hurry and see this great exhibition. I want to thank everyone who was logged on and looking at this and learning along with me. And once again, Peter, Courtney, thank you so much for sharing your vast experience and your knowledge of the Egyptian artifacts and the history with all of our listeners and viewers. And I got to say, we are an Urban One station, WKJS Richmond, WKJM Petersburg, 99.3 and 105.7 KISS FM. I am King Tut. Any parting words, Peter and Courtney, you want to say to our people?
I want to invite everybody to come to the museum. Both during this exhibition, we are free to the public every day, and you can come for 10 minutes, you can come for 10 hours. But really, there's so many wonderful things in the museum and in this exhibition. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Once again, bmfa.museum. If you need more information, log on to kissrichmond.com. Everyone out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and try to entertain yourself. Go to this exhibition. Get your mind right. Thank you, people.
Okay. Thank you.